My name is Miranda, I am 35 years old, and despite the fact that I am increasingly told that I should already be in my place, I truly feel that this is where I am now. I work as a deputy general manager at a company that produces sports nutrition, and, honestly, I love my job, even if it sometimes requires too much of me. I like being in the thick of things, solving problems, going to meetings, making deals, and feeling like my efforts are bringing results. It gives me a sense of control, stability, and freedom, which for me, as a woman, have always been more important than a stamp in my passport. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy! But for some reason, when I say that I am single, people look at me as if I have just confessed to something shameful. Why are you still single? Is a question I hear more often than how are you feeling, or what do you want yourself, and every time I have to smile, throw up my hands and say something like, right now I just don't need a serious relationship, and it's true, my life is full, I have enough worries, goals, joys and even my own little weaknesses. I don't feel empty, isn't that enough? My younger brother Jake is 28, last year he married his girlfriend Sarah, they had been together since college, and their story seemed so predictable, as if someone had written the script in advance, meeting at a party, renting an apartment, going to their parents for the holidays, quarrels, reconciliations, engagement and, finally, marriage. No one was surprised when they announced their engagement, because everyone had been waiting for it for a long time. Of course, I was sincerely happy for them. Jake is my younger brother, the closest person to me after my parents, and when he asked for my help, I didn't even hesitate. For their wedding, I gave them $15,000. Yes, it is a lot of money even by my standards, despite the good salary, but I wanted them to have a good start, so that they could not worry about the little things when they began to build a new life. It was not just a gift, it was my blessing on their path. I really wanted to help them start everything from scratch, without feeling any embarrassment or duty. The wedding itself was magical. Sarah looked stunning in a white lace dress, her hair pulled back into an elegant bun, her eyes shining with happiness, and Jake, looking at her, could not hide his joy. He was beaming like a boy who was given the most desired gift. The ceremony took place in the same small church where we went with my grandmother every Sunday. I remember how as a child I sat on the bench and twirled the prayer book in my hands, trying not to fall asleep under the monotonous speeches of the pastor. At the time, I thought the place was too old-fashioned. But now it seemed unexpectedly cozy, warm, almost homey. The reception was held in a beautiful hotel room in the city center. Lights, music, flower arrangements on every table, happy faces. Everything was perfect until the family conversations began. As soon as we sat down at the table, my Aunt Linda, with a glass of champagne in her hand and that same condescending expression on her face that I have known since childhood, leaned over to me and casually said, "Miranda, when are you going to settle down already?" Before I could respond, Aunt Karen immediately intervened, picking up, "Now you are the only unmarried one in the whole family." I sighed quietly, as if I didn't know it myself, and, as if on cue, my mother decided to chime in, "It's time for you to hear the patter of little feet in your big house, dear." I smiled, nodded, and said nothing, as I always do in such situations. Inside, I felt a slow, hot wave of excitement rising in my chest, and I could only pray that I would have enough self-control not to lose my temper. Why do they think that if a woman is alone, then there is something wrong with her? As if loneliness is a disease that needs to be immediately cured by a husband and children. I have a job that I adore, a house that I dreamed of, and a life in which I am happy. What else do they need? After the wedding, Jake and Sarah moved into a studio apartment that their parents gave them. It is small, but cozy and in a good area. The most important thing is that they do not pay rent, because the apartment belongs to the family, and Mom and Dad gave it to them for free to support them in the beginning. Mom, however, asked me to take on the payment of utility bills, and I agreed. I do not mind helping. I know how difficult it can be in the first months, when everything is still unstable, but sometimes, when I pay my electricity and gas bills, I think, does anyone really appreciate this? Or is everything taken for granted? At first, everything was calm. Sarah was nice, always smiling politely when we gathered for dinner at my parents' house. She thanked me for helping with the payments, asked about my work, complimented my dresses, and even asked my opinion about her new interior design ideas. I thought we were developing a good relationship. And I was happy, because I understood how important it is for there to be respect and support in a family. I worked hard to get everything I have now. From the age of 16, I worked first on weekends in a store, then as a waitress, then in an office. I went to college, worked nights to pay for my education, and slowly, step by step, moved up the career ladder. 13 years of work and dedication before I was appointed deputy general manager. It was a victory, and 2 years ago, I bought my house, spacious, bright, with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a cozy backyard. It wasn't just a house, it was my proof that I had made it. I deserved every square foot. I looked for it for a long time, looked at dozens of options, until I found the one that felt right. It's in a good area, just 15 minutes from the office. When I signed the paperwork, my hands were shaking, and for the first time in a long time, I cried, from happiness. This was my home, bought with my own money, my fortress. When I first moved in, I gave my parents a spare key. They helped me with the furniture, and at the time it seemed natural that they would have access, in case something happened. After all, they were my parents. I trusted them completely. Every Sunday, like clockwork, the table is set in my parents' house, and the aroma of stewed meat or chicken fills the entire first floor, spreading through the hallway and all the way to the living room, like the smell of childhood. When Jake and I, still in school uniforms, would run in from the street and throw off our backpacks to sit at that very oval wooden table covered with a slightly worn embroidered tablecloth that my mother loved so much. This tradition, family dinners on Sundays, has lived with us for many years, and despite the changes, age, adult concerns, and our own homes, we still gather, and there is something comforting in this. As if the past is still nearby and you can hide from the present for a while. Now we sit at the same table, only the conversations have become different, not about grades, school stories, or a new teacher, but about work, bills, repairs, vacations, and, increasingly, about children. Mom, as always, bustles around the stove, putting out bowls of mashed potatoes, green peas, and gravy, and we sit, smiling, asking each other how the week went, what's new. It would all seem pleasant, if not for one, but that over time began to be felt more and more, not in words, but in something invisible. Like tension in the air. Sarah, as a rule, does not say much during these dinners, but for some time now I began to notice how her silence has become expressive. She did not make direct attacks, did not raise her voice, but intonations appeared in her remarks that made you feel uneasy. One day she would casually say that our studio is so hard to fit everything, especially now that we have so many gifts from the wedding. Then, settling more comfortably on the sofa, she would say, "It's so nice to feel for once that there is space." She did not call me by name, did not point a finger, but everyone in the room knew who she was talking about, especially when, as she cut into a piece of chicken, she casually said, "You know, it's really sad how single women live in huge houses and married couples crammed into boxes." Mom and Dad nodded, as if she'd spoken their minds. I pretended not to get the hint, but deep down I knew exactly where she was going with this. And I didn't like it at all. I was starting to feel like Sarah was up to something, that this wasn't just frustration with the cramped apartment, but a slowly building campaign. The problem was that their apartment wasn't some squalid shack. Yes, it was a studio, yes, small, but they didn't have to pay rent, didn't have to take out loans or worry about mortgage interest. It was a great opportunity for a young couple. They only paid for utilities, and I even helped them with that. Any couple their age, especially at the start, would be happy to be in their position, but Sarah pretended to live in a cupboard under the stairs. At first, I tried to ignore her. Family is always on thin ice, and sometimes it's better to remain silent than to start an argument that would destroy the fragile balance. But her hints were becoming less and less veiled. At one dinner, she looked around with a dramatic sigh and said, "It's so nice to have a place in the house for hobbies and privacy." Or another time, noticing me talking about a new kitchen appliance, she said with a hint of envy, "It must be so convenient to cook without having to move the dehydrator from the middle of the kitchen." Even my brother, Jake, began to pick up on this wave. He once mentioned, "Sarah and I started talking about kids, but, you know, kids need space," and looked at me with a long, meaningful look, as if he expected me to offer them the keys to my house myself. But I had worked too hard to have all this. and I was not going to feel guilty for having managed to achieve good conditions for myself. My work deserves respect, not reproach. The worst thing is my parents' reaction. They listen to Sarah, nod, agree, and I begin to feel like some kind of hanger-on, a selfish person who is greedy with her life, as if my achievements are a reason to reproach, as if all my years of helping financially, emotionally, practically now do not matter. After all, I was the one who helped organize the wedding, I paid the bills, I gave my parents money when they needed it, and now, it turns out, I am selfish, just because I am not going to give up the house that I have been working towards for 13 years. About 3 months had passed since the beginning of these hints, when I noticed oddities. It was one of those ordinary Sundays, but from the very beginning, something was wrong, the atmosphere not tense, but different. My parents exchanged glances with Jake and Sarah, as if there was some secret between them that was about to burst out. Sarah was shining, literally glowing from within, but it was not just her duty smile, polite and neat. No, it was that wide, confident smile of a man who was about to say, "Now pay attention." Jake was sitting next to her, and he kept touching her belly, lightly, gently, as if he were guarding it. I watched him put his hand on her waist again, and it all became clear to me. Sarah is pregnant, I thought, watching them. They were going to tell her at dinner. I understood it with such clarity, as if I had heard the words myself, and, surprisingly, despite all the recent bitterness, despite the irritation that had been building up in me for the past few weeks, I felt a warm, real feeling. Joy, because Jake had always been good with children, and I could imagine what kind of father he would be. Sarah, despite her behavior, still seemed like a woman capable of being a good mother, caring, patient. I thought that maybe a child would change everything, that maybe this news would finally distract the family from my bachelor status, and their conversations would have a new, real topic around which they could all unite. We all took our usual places at the dinner table, as usual, and it was as if nothing foreshadowed that this dinner would become a turning point that I would never be able to forget, no matter how much I wanted it to. My mother, as always, served her signature stew with potatoes and homemade buns. The aroma filled the house, soaked into the walls, like a reminder of childhood, of how cozy and safe it once was within these walls. We talked about the weather, about work, about some ridiculous show that Dad had watched the night before, and for a second I even thought that maybe I imagined it all, the tension, the innuendo, the sidelong glances. But then Jake cleared his throat, and the room immediately fell silent, as if everyone sensed that something important was about to happen. "Sarah and I have some news to share," he said, smiling slightly and holding out his hand to Sarah, who squeezed his fingers in return and looked into his eyes as if she had forgotten about everything but him. "We're having a baby." It all happened so fast. First I noticed Mom's hands shaking, then tears streaming down her cheeks, and then she suddenly jumped up from her chair, threw her arms around Sarah, and held her so tightly that Sarah had to sigh in surprise. Dad shook Jake's hand with the air of a man who had just heard that his son had won the lottery, and from the look on his face, it was clearly at least $1 million. I smiled, genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, because, despite everything, this really was wonderful news. "Congratulations," I said, and looked straight at Jake. "I mean it, this is very exciting, but, as so often happened in our family, this warm moment could not be left alone." Mom turned to me, her eyes wet, and without a second thought, added, "Well, at least one of my children will give me grandchildren." She looked straight at me, and these words, although spoken with a gentle, motherly intonation, pierced me like a cold needle. "I was beginning to think that I would never have them," she continued, and I felt a wave of irritation rise in my throat, but I held back. This was Jake and Sarah's moment, not mine, and certainly not the time to argue about my life decisions. I just nodded, smiled, and congratulated them again, trying to keep my voice level. But Sarah suddenly turned to me, still with that kind, sweet smile of hers, which I knew could hide much more than it seemed. "Actually, Miranda, I was talking to Jake and your parents about something important," she began, as if choosing each word with special care. "It has to do with our housing situation." She spoke calmly, but there was a confidence in her voice that only comes from someone who knows in advance that they will be supported. "We have all come to the conclusion that housing in our family is not distributed fairly." My fork froze in my hand. I slowly stopped chewing and looked at her. "What do you mean?" I asked, although I already understood everything. Mom and Dad nodded. Jake sat silently, with the same expression on his face, as if he just had to wait for everything to be said out loud. You live alone in this huge house, Sarah continued, unblinking, with all these empty rooms, and we are crammed into a studio, in one room, and now that we are having a baby, we just need more space. I swallowed. Okay, I said slowly, deliberately calmly, what does that have to do with me? Mom intervened. Miranda, you have to do what a real sister would do, she said, in the same tone she'd used when I was a kid to demand that I give up my last cookie to my brother. You have to prove your love for Jake and your future nephew. I felt a slight nausea rising. And how am I supposed to do that? I asked, but inside I already knew what I was about to hear. You have to give your house to Jake and Sarah, Mom said, as if it wasn't a suggestion but an obvious truth that I couldn't figure out why I hadn't voiced myself yet. They need it more than you do. I stared at her, not believing my ears. Are you serious? I said, even though I could already see the answer in their faces. Absolutely serious, Dad confirmed, as if we were discussing some outdated kitchen set instead of the house I was paying for every month. You're moving into the studio where Jake and Sarah are now, and we're even ready to make it official. You're transferring the house to Jake and the studio is yours. I looked around the table at everyone, not a single smile wavered. Not a single face betrayed any doubt. They truly believed that this was fair. No, I said, getting up from my chair, absolutely not. I'm not giving up my house. I'm not giving it up, Mom. Mom exhaled sharply, as if I'd hit her with the words. Don't be so selfish, Miranda, she blurted out, and the phrase seemed to send a shiver down my spine. Selfish? I blinked, unable to immediately believe that she'd said that out loud. I worked for 13 years to afford this house, I replied, feeling my voice grow firmer. I saved every penny, I did it all myself, I deserve it. But before I could finish, Dad, without looking at me, said, you're just an old maid who'll never get married or have kids anyway. Why do you need a house like this? The words sounded like a slap in the face. I could physically feel them distancing me from him, as if we had become strangers in an instant. Jake decided to chime in, too. You're greedy, Miranda. Family should help family. Greedy? I laughed, and it wasn't laughter, but a low, raspy exhalation, the kind of sound a person makes when they've been hurt but refuse to show pain. I gave you $15,000 for your wedding, I said, not raising my voice, but each word sounding like a hammer blow. I pay your electric bill every month, your gas bill, your water bill. Tell me, please, how exactly am I greedy? Jake sighed and shrugged, as if my words were some kind of inappropriate melodramatic outburst. It's different, he said quietly, not looking me in the eye. No, it's not different, I answered sharply, my voice rising. It's the same thing. It's help, it's support, it's love, and if you can't see that, it's not me, it's you. I felt the anger building inside me. The same anger that had been pent up by years of polite smiles and nods and endlessly swallowing insults. I'm tired of you all. Looking at me like I'm some kind of glitch in the family system, I continued, looking at each of them in turn. I'm tired of you, Mom, always loving Jake more than you loved me. Mom looked dumbfounded, and I heard her mutter, weakly, that's not true, but there was no conviction in her voice, and I knew she felt it too. Really? Then here's an idea, I said, straightening up, sell your studio, take the money, put it toward a down payment, and buy Jake and Sarah a house. That's the solution. It's all fair and square. My parents looked at each other as if I'd just suggested they go to Mars. Dad shook his head. We can't afford another mortgage, he said wearily. Well, live within your means then, I snapped, slinging my purse over my shoulder. Don't start dreaming about taking my house just because you don't want to. Spend your own money. I turned and walked toward the door, but of course they couldn't just let me go. Miranda, that's ridiculous, Mom yelled. You're selfish, Dad added, not even bothering to change his tone. You're greedy, Jake chimed in. I paused at the threshold, turned one last time, looked at them, at my family, at the people for whom I'd spent years putting aside my desires, my time, my money. I'm done with this conversation, I said quietly but firmly. I'm not giving up my house. Period. And with that, I walked out the door, closing it behind me with such care as if I were trying not to spill the last of my dignity. When I got home, to my house, to my own space, I stood in the hallway for a long time, allowing myself to look around. The cozy couch I'd picked out after 10 trips to the store and 3 months of waiting for delivery. The kitchen table where I sit every morning with a cup of coffee, watching the soft morning light filter through the blinds. The bedroom with its white curtains and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the maple tree in my yard that I'd planted myself, all of this is mine. I made it, I built it, I earned every square foot of it, and if anyone thinks I don't deserve to have all of this just because I'm a woman without a husband and children, let them. I made myself some strong tea, sat down in a chair by the window, and for the first time in months felt not anxiety, not resentment, not fatigue, but calm. I said no to their absurd, shameless plan, and the world did not collapse. I stood my ground, I saved myself. The next morning, at exactly 7, the phone rang, Mom's name appeared on the screen, I didn't answer. 10 minutes later, a call from Dad, then Jake, then, to my surprise, even Sarah. I turned off the sound and continued getting ready for work, as if it were a normal morning, and not a continuation of the family attack. By lunchtime, I already had 12 missed calls and almost 24 messages on my phone. I was in no hurry to read them, but, having settled down in the break room with a sandwich, I still opened the screen. Miranda, we need to talk, you are being unreasonable. It was Mom, your brother needs your help, family first. From Dad, Sarah cried all night after you said that, you're hurting a pregnant woman. From Jake, I thought you loved me like a sister, I guess I was wrong. From Sarah, I looked at these messages, read each one to the end, then just hit delete, one after another, without hesitation. They wanted me to feel guilty, to fall back into my usual role, caring, obedient, sacrificing. But I'm not playing their game anymore. The next 3 days were a marathon of emotional pressure. My phone was ringing off the hook. Each time, it was one of them, the same crowd, the same goal, to wear me down, to bend me, to push me out of my firm no. Voicemails were the next stage. I turned on the first one, my mother's voice, trembling, accusing, Miranda, you're destroying our family with your selfishness. The second one, my father's, we didn't raise you right, I'm disappointed. The third one, Jake, you're stressing Sarah out, if anything happens to the baby, it's on you. Those words were the last straw. Now they were trying to pin the responsibility for Sarah's pregnancy complications on me, as if my refusal to give them the house could somehow magically cause a miscarriage or affect the health of a child I hadn't even asked to be dragged into this situation. It wasn't just ridiculous, it was vile, disgusting, manipulative to the point where I literally felt something ancient and furious boiling up inside me. I knew if I didn't talk it out, I would explode, so at work, I showed the messages to my coworker and friend Lisa, the woman I'd worked alongside for 8 long years and who knew more about my family situation than perhaps anyone else. Are you kidding me? She said, rereading the message from Jake, in which he accused me of threatening the pregnancy. They seriously think that if you don't hand over the keys to your house, the baby will be irreparably harmed? This is emotional blackmail of the worst kind. They're literally trying to guilt trip you. I nodded. Apparently, by their logic, I'm killing the baby just by living in my house. You're like the wicked witch from the family fairy tale. I chuckled, although I didn't feel any fun inside. This is crazy, Lisa said, and there was steel in her voice. You know it's not your fault, not at all. They're just making fun of you. They're turning your kindness into a weapon. I took a deep breath. No, Liz, I really do, but damn, it's so important to hear it from someone else sometimes. Just a reminder that I'm not going crazy. Lisa looked at me in that way that only true friends can. Don't you dare back down, Miranda, you worked hard for this house. They have no right to even mention it. Remember who you are. By the end of the week, their creativity, if you could call it that, had reached a whole new level. I started getting not just messages, but collections of articles, one after another, as if they were organizing an entire information campaign. The topics were meaningful, about family loyalty, about the strength of blood ties, about women who sacrificed themselves for their families. Mom sent me a Bible passage about loving one's neighbor, which she thought would enlighten me like a spell. Dad forwarded me an article about a woman who gave up everything to help her sister with her children. Under the article, he wrote, "That could have been you, you could have been the hero of this story." I burst out laughing, unable to contain myself out loud, right there in the office, attracting the gaze of my colleagues. A hero who gave up his dream to please whims? This was not heroism, it was stupidity disguised as virtue. But the worst of all were the messages from Sarah. She went from subtle hints to outright pressure. First, she sent ultrasound pictures with captions like, "Your nephew needs a room, you want him to have a good life, right? Then came a photo of their studio, cramped and with things literally piling on top of each other, with the caption, "Do you really want your family to live like this?" I wanted to respond, to remind her that they were living there for free, that they weren't paying rent, that I was covering their bills, and that no amount of gratitude from her was worth this manipulation, but I held back. I knew that any word, any move from my side would be perceived as weakness, as a chance to press further, so I didn't write anything. I just stared at the screen, deleted it, and stepped back. The more they pressed, the firmer my no became. As the week wore on, the calls and messages began to subside, like water had finally begun to drain from a bucket that had spilled over. I slowed down. I almost believed that maybe they realized they had overstepped their bounds, that they had accepted my decision, but I should have known, they weren't the type to give up. That Friday I came to work as usual, but by lunchtime I felt like my body was refusing to obey me. My temperature was rising, my joints were aching, my head was buzzing like a bell. I went to my boss, apologized and said that I seemed to be sick and would rather go home. He waved his hand. "Go, Miranda, take a rest, you always work yourself to the bone." Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon I got behind the wheel and drove home. I drove, dreaming of hot tea, a blanket and a couple of episodes of an old TV series in which no one requires you to give up your house, but when I turned onto my street and saw the driveway, my heart sank somewhere down. In front of my house was a huge van with the inscription "Murphy's Movers" on the side, and a little further, my parents' car was parked. I immediately realized that something was wrong, very wrong. I parked and ran to the door in a daze. I inserted the key, turned it, and the lock worked, and I walked in. There was movement in the hall. Knocking, shuffling, the sound of a newspaper rustling under my hands. I walked further and froze. Mom was standing in the kitchen, carefully wrapping my place settings in an old newspaper. Dad was taking my books off the shelves, the ones I had collected over the years, and putting them in boxes. The boxes, marked with a Sharpie, were already stacked against the wall, ready to go. "What the hell is going on here?" I screamed, not recognizing my own voice. They both jumped, like children caught doing something forbidden, and there was no shame or remorse in their guilty expressions, only surprise at being caught, as if they really thought they had the right to do what they were doing. "Oh, Miranda," my mother said, trying to sound casual, as if I'd just caught her watering my plants on the sly. "We thought you were at work." I stood in the middle of the hallway, keys in my hands, pain in my eyes, trying to keep my voice calm, although inside I was already seething. "I asked you a question," I said, looking at her, then at my father, who continued to put my books in the box without blinking. "What are you doing in my house?" My mother straightened up and spoke with forced cheerfulness, as if we were discussing who would take out the trash. "We're helping you move. Jake and Sarah are moving here, and you're moving into their studio." I felt something tearing inside. "I've told you 10 times that I'm not going to do this." My voice began to rise, and I no longer wanted to hold back. I'd been clear and unambiguous about it. "This is my house, I'm not moving." My father, not looking at me, continued packing his books, and said with an indifference that startled me, "We all decided you didn't need that much space. It's not fair that you have 4 bedrooms and they have a baby on the way in 1 room." "I don't care what you decided," I blurted out, feeling a lump in my throat. "This is my house." But they didn't even pause. My mother carefully folded my wool sweater and placed it in a box next to my shoes, and my father wrapped a framed photograph of me holding my diploma and smiling against the backdrop of the university in an old newspaper and placed it in the pile as if it were just another piece of furniture. "Stop it," I said sharply. "Stop packing my things right now." My mother didn't even turn around. "Miranda, don't make this difficult," she snapped, as if I wasn't the owner of the house but a guest meddling in someone else's business. "We're doing what we need to do." That's when I lost it. I turned around, ran into the bedroom, grabbed the phone, and, my fingers shaking, dialed 911. "Hello," I said into the phone, trying to speak clearly. "I need to report a break-in. People are in my house and packing my things without permission." "Are you in immediate danger?" the operator asked. "No. But they are stealing my things. They are my parents, and I didn't give them permission to come in." I was swallowing back tears, but my voice was firm. "They won't leave. We'll send a patrol right away," she replied. The police arrived 5 minutes later, 2 uniformed officers with cold determination on their faces. I opened the door and led them inside, showing them everything: the boxes, the wrappers, the people who were never supposed to be there. My parents tried to pretend it was all a misunderstanding. Officer, this is our daughter, my father began, coming closer. We're just helping her move. Did she ask for your help? One of the officers asked sternly. Well, no, but, my father began. Ma'am, the second officer turned to me. Did you give them permission to be in your home and touch your things? Absolutely not, I said. I've told them more than once that I'm not moving anywhere. This is my home. The officers exchanged glances, then turned to my parents. Sir, ma'am, you need to come with us. This is trespassing. My mother screamed, this is ridiculous. We're her parents. The second officer didn't even flinch. That doesn't give you the right to enter her house without permission. My father stepped forward, raising his hand in a gesture that was probably meant to be indignant but came across as threatening, and the next second, they were both standing with handcuffs on their wrists, right in the middle of my living room, the one I'd so lovingly decorated. I watched them go, feeling nothing but emptiness. One of the movers, who had been watching the whole time, in shock, approached me hesitantly. What do we do with the stuff? He asked, gesturing at the boxes. Put it all back where it was, I said, and send the bill to whoever hired you. When they were gone and silence returned to my house, I sat at the kitchen table, my head in my hands. It took me a moment to process what had just happened. My own parents, the people I'd spent years supporting, giving up vacations for, bailing me out in times of crisis, fighting for with my boss when my dad needed money for treatment, had stormed into my home and tried to push me out of their lives, as if I were just a temporary inhabitant of their fantasy of a proper family. They actually thought they had the right to decide for me, that I wasn't an adult, just a tool in their script. 2 hours later, the phone rang. Mom was on the screen. I wasn't surprised. I knew she was calling from the police station. I picked up the phone. Miranda, her voice was broken, but it still held an attempt at command. You have to drop these charges. We're your parents. We were just trying to help. I sat up straight. No, I said quietly. I'm done with all of you. You can't be serious, she whispered. I'm dead serious, I said, and hung up. The next morning, I went to the station and confirmed that I was not going to drop the charges. My parents need to learn to take responsibility for their actions, I told the officer. I'm tired of being their doormat. It won't happen again. That same evening, just as I'd expected, my parents posted bail and walked out of jail, quickly, quietly, as if it were just a temporary inconvenience, like a shopping trip gone wrong. They had money, good connections, a clean record, no criminal record, just an unhealthy dose of self-confidence and a long-standing habit of getting their way. I wasn't surprised that they walked out. I expected it. What surprised me was that they didn't call me right away, didn't explode in anger, didn't try to hammer another dose of guilt into me, didn't slap the phone with words that had become something of a training tool for them over the years, but instead, the next morning, it was my grandmother who called. I could immediately sense the heaviness in her voice, not the kind that comes with age, but the kind that family wars leave behind. Listen, your parents are really upset, she said wearily, as if she'd heard their entire monologue before. They can't believe you actually called the police and had them arrested. I took a deep breath and answered calmly, though the echo of that scene in my house still rang inside me. They broke into my home, I said, without warning, without permission, and started packing up my things like I was dead. It wasn't a misunderstanding, it was an invasion. They were going to carry me out of my life like an old couch. I know, she murmured. I told them you did the right thing, that this was your home, that they crossed a line, but still, Miranda, calling the police on your own parents, that's a big step. I bit my lip. What should I have done, Grandma? Asked them politely to stop taking out my dishes? My voice still wavered. I don't know, she admitted. This whole situation is a nightmare, but you can't let it ruin your family. I paused for a second, then said, I didn't ruin anything. They did it themselves, with their own hands, their own decisions, their own neglect. Grandma sighed, and there were so many years and pain in that sigh. Maybe you're right, but they're still your parents, is that true? I asked quietly, because parents, as I understand it, are supposed to love their children, support them, protect them, not use them as a resource, not try to squeeze every last drop out of them, hiding behind the word family. After the conversation, I sat in a chair, looking out the window, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel guilty. I only felt loneliness, not a scary one, but a pure one. After 3 days of silence, I realized how pleasant it was. No messages, no calls, no hints, no demands, no whining, just peace. I woke up in the morning, made coffee, turned on my favorite music, and walked around the house barefoot, not thinking that I had to justify my own life to anyone. But this respite didn't last forever. One morning, I found an envelope in my mailbox, cream, thick, with the elegant handwriting I'd known since childhood, my mother. Inside, a letter on her personalized letterhead, embossed, and smelling of her perfume. I unfolded the paper and read. Miranda, it began, after much thought and discussion with your father and brother, we have decided to disown you. You are no longer our daughter. Your selfish actions have shown us that you care nothing for your family. You have chosen material things over your kind. You have chosen home over us. We will no longer contact you, and we do not want you to contact us. Sincerely, former mother. Instead of love, mother. I read the letter twice, carefully, slowly, letting each word wash over me. And then I simply set it down on the kitchen table. I expected to feel something, anger, hurt, betrayal, that bitterness would rise, rolling up my throat, as it used to, but instead, relief, clean, bright, liberating. I sat in my living room, a cup of strong coffee in my hands, and looked around my space, my chair, my books, my window to the garden, the house that I had bought not on a whim, but step by step, working, saving, denying myself many things, the house that was not just a roof over my head, but a symbol of my path, my efforts, my independence, and they wanted to steal it under the pretext of love. But now all that was behind me, and even if they thought their letter would break my heart, even if they imagined how I would stand at their door, begging them to take me back, instead, I felt light, free from the constant reproaches, from the endless demands, from the manipulations in which I lived most of my adult life. The following weeks were the quietest, the calmest, the most mine. I went to work, came back to a house where no one judged me, no one imposed other people's decisions on me. I read books, replanted flowers, baked cakes just because I wanted to, without thinking about Sunday dinners, about sidelong glances, about inappropriate comments. For the first time, I lived. Sometimes my grandmother called, we talked. Calmly, in one conversation, she let slip, Jake and Sarah are still in the studio. The baby is due in a couple of months, but they seem to be coping. I nodded. And how are the parents? I asked, just out of politeness. They are thinking of selling the house and the studio. They want to use the money to buy 2 apartments, one for themselves, one for Jake and Sarah, she said, with that intonation when a person finally understands a simple thing. I laughed. They could have done it from the very beginning, I answered. Instead of trying to throw me out of my house, they just wanted to take advantage of you. Grandma said quietly, they didn't think you could resist. I smiled, looking out the window. Well, then they were wrong. Later, with cold clarity, I learned from my grandmother that the whole thing, from the seizure of my house to the theater with the letter, was not a spontaneous whim, not a last-minute panicked attempt to solve a housing problem, but a carefully thought-out, almost strategic plan that my parents had been hatching for months. They had discussed it behind my back, made schedules, found movers, called realtors. As if I were not a person but just a variable in their equation. They had convinced themselves that I did not deserve this house because I was alone, without a husband, without children, without all the normality they had so stubbornly elevated to a cult. They had decided that my kindness would be my weakness, that I would not be able to refuse them if everything was on the line, if they played hard enough on my guilt and desire to preserve some ties to my family. But they were wrong. They made a mistake twice, both in how kind I can be and in how decisive I can be. The irony was that if they had simply come to me not with complaints, not with accusations, not with this hypocrisy, but humanly, with sincerity, if they had explained their situation, acknowledged the difficulties, talked to me as an adult woman, their daughter, and asked for help, perhaps I would have really thought about it, perhaps I would have even helped. I have always been generous with my family, always ready to lend a shoulder, support with words, money, time, but they did not want to ask. It was important for them not to receive, but to take. They needed control, not cooperation. They wanted to punish me for achieving something on my own, for being strong enough to live by my own rules. 6 months passed, and one day my grandmother, in one of our calm conversations, told me that they had finally carried out their plan. They sold the old family home and the studio they gave to Jake and Sarah. they used the proceeds to buy 2 small properties. The parents moved into a neat but modest condominium, and Jake and Sarah got a 2-bedroom apartment in a new residential complex. Everyone, she said, was happy. Everyone had found their place, everyone had finally calmed down. I listened to this without pain, without envy, without gloating. I was simply stating a fact. It was good that they had found a solution, the very one they could have chosen from the very beginning. If only they had not been so sure that they had the right to deprive me of my choice. I stayed in my home in the same cozy, light-filled space that I had been building for years. The house was still my refuge, my fortress, my symbol of freedom. I still had a favorite job, independence, self-respect, and, most importantly, there were no longer people in my life who extorted my love under the guise of debt. Sometimes, of course, I missed things: Sunday dinners, the smell of my mother's pies, those funny conversations about nothing that happened between family members. I missed the family I once imagined, not the one I finally got, but I didn't miss the constant criticism, the constant feeling that everything I did was wrong, in the wrong tone, with the wrong face. I didn't miss having to constantly prove my worth. My life has become quieter now, but it has become mine. Now I decide for myself what to do with money, time, and space. I no longer allow anyone to belittle my success, to call it selfishness just because it does not fit into their idea of the norm. No one is trying to take away from me what I have created with my own hands, my sweat, my patience, and you know what? Thanks to everything that happened, I learned something very important, something that was not taught in school, not told in books, not admitted in my family. I learned that people who claim to love you do not always want the best for you, that under the guise of care there can be envy, greed, fear, and that removing such people from your life is not betrayal, but caring for yourself. My family thought that by disowning me, they were teaching me a lesson, that I would give in, repent, crawl back, stretch out my hands with the keys to the house, ask for forgiveness. But, in fact, they taught themselves a lesson. They showed me that I am stronger than I thought, that my dignity is more important than their approval, that happiness is not in being a good daughter, but in being honest with yourself, and that choosing yourself is not selfishness, it is a necessity.